All right, let's do a little bit of a history thing. I'm wearing my Gordie Howe jersey, which is why this is the old Red Wings logo, which is slightly different from the one they have now. That's why I got it, because the logo is slightly different. All right. So teams that are up 3-2, what I've done is I've had the teams that were up 3-2 in a series, and I've put them on the left. You'll notice the last team that was up 3-2 in a Stanley Cup final, and the series went 7, was the Vancouver Canucks against the Boston Bruins. Now, the interesting thing is, Boston and Pittsburgh are the last two teams to win Game 6 to force Game 7. They also both won Game 7. The funny thing is, they both won those games on the road. So, there's gaudy numbers in and about Game 6 and 7 when you look at home team records, but the last two Game 7s have been won by the road team. So St. Louis has that in its favor. Prior to that, 2011 was Boston, 2009 was Pittsburgh, 2006 was Carolina. Edmonton won Game 6 at home, Carolina won Game 7 at home. 2004, of course, Calgary was ahead of Tampa, 3-2. Tampa won the next two games. They won on the road, and then they won Game 7 at home. 2003, this was a series where the home team won every single game. Anaheim won Game 6, New Jersey won Game 7. So, that's 3 in a row at home. Why not make it 4? 2001, New Jersey was ahead of Colorado, 3-2. Colorado won Game 7 on the road, and then won Game 7 at home. So, home teams did very well. 1994, Canuck fans remember this, Rangers were ahead 3-1 in that series, really. Vancouver wins Game 6 at home to force Game 7, and the New York Rangers won Game 7 at home. The Edmonton Oilers in 1987 against the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers won Game 6 at home. They also won Game 5 in Edmonton. Edmonton did win Game 7 at home, but boy, did Philly put some fear into them. 1971, so there's a 16-year gap in there where the finals are pretty one-sided for the most part. 1971, Chicago was ahead of the Montreal Canadiens. Montreal won Game 6 at home and Game 7 on the road. So that is 6 in a row that were won at home. There's a road win here, and there's 2 road wins up here. Now, in terms of trying to rewrite history, St. Louis is right there. I did the video earlier on how St. Louis is 1 win away from tying the all-time record for wins on the road in the playoffs. Going back further, 1965, Montreal was ahead of Chicago 3-2. Chicago wins Game 6 at home. Montreal won Game 7 at home. 1965, Montreal was ahead of Chicago 3-2. Or no, Chicago ahead of Montreal in 71. Montreal won both games. 65, Chicago wins at home. Montreal wins at home. 64, Toronto won it on the road in Game 6, and then they won Game 7 at home. 1955, I should say. Easy for me to say, right? Getting ahead of myself. It's an aging thing. You'll see. 1955, Detroit's ahead of Montreal 3-2. Montreal won Game 6 at home. Detroit wins 7 at home. And they did the same thing in 1954, where Montreal fought back. I believe it was a 3-1 series lead for Detroit. Detroit does win Game 7 to avoid the collapse. 1950, scheduling conflicts at Madison Square Garden. I remember doing this when I did the history videos last summer. Madison Square Garden is so interesting in that they'd have the circus or whatever scheduled, and the New York Rangers didn't get a single technical home game in the entire series. Games 1 and 4 through 7 were played at the Olympia in Detroit. Games 2 and 3 were played at Toronto. Yeah. So the home games that the Rangers had, 2 out of 7 were in Toronto. It's amazing the Rangers did as well as they did. But Detroit won Games 6 and 7 that were both at the Olympia in Detroit. 1945, Toronto was ahead of Detroit 3-2. Detroit won Game 6 on the road. Then Toronto won Game 7 on the road. That's your other road win. 1942, Toronto wins Game 6 on the road and 7 at home. That was a 3-0 series comeback. So the interesting thing is that in 1942, Toronto comes back from 3-0 down. Detroit almost did the exact same thing in 1945, where Toronto had been ahead 3-0, and it took 7 games for them to shut things down. There have been 16 Game 7s. Wednesday will make it 17. There have been 8 by my count 3-2 comebacks. So that's half the time the team that wins game 6 wins game 7 as well. But the home team has a 12-4 record. And as I said, the last 2 game 7s were won by road teams in this situation. A road win in 6, this is where it gets tricky. Tampa Bay in 2004, they win at home. 2001, Colorado, they win at home. 1964, Toronto, they won theirs. 1945, Detroit, they lost theirs. So Detroit's the one example of not making it. Toronto won theirs. So 4 out of 5 times, the team that wins on the road in Game 6 ends up winning the Stanley Cup at home in Game 7. The Boston Bruins in Game 7s at home, they're 14-8 all time, which means they've lost 8 times at home in Game 7s. The St. Louis Blues, Game 7 on the road, they're 4-6 all time. All these numbers tell you one thing. It's unpredictable. And Game 7s in the Stanley Cup Finals, this is it. This is every single Game 7 we've ever seen in National Hockey League history. Not long before 1942, it's a best of 5. Before that, it was a best of 3. And before that, it was a 2-game series, most total goals wins. This is a very unusual circumstance. And while you could point to signs and say, hey, this looks like Boston's going to win, I could point to signs and say, hey, the last 2 Game 7s were won by the road team. So we never know. It's going to be really interesting. This is the kind of thing that I know at this time of year we can look at and have fun with. And the individual Game 7s, I could take a look at that tomorrow as well. But for now, I thought this would be a fun thing to look at. The team that's up 3-2, how often do they win? And how many teams that are in this column here do we have fan bases right now saying, gee, it would have been nice. Like 2011, Vancouver, that would have been nice, right? 2004, Calgary, you guys would have been happy with that win. The New Jersey Devils, if they win in 2001, you're looking at a dynasty. They would have won in 2000, 2001, 2003. That's a dynasty. And of course, for Chicago, if they'd won it in 71, it wouldn't have felt as long. It wouldn't have felt as desperate when they finally won a Stanley Cup in 2010. That Chicago Blackhawks franchise, 65-71 both. They won their cup in 61, and it felt like they should have won more. They weren't able to break through. And I'm wearing a Detroit Red Wings jersey because notice Detroit's on this board quite a bit. They know all about Game 7s. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of 16 previously played Game 7s in the Stanley Cup Final have featured the Detroit Red Wings. So, bunch of little trivia for you guys. You can do whatever you'd like to with that. Mold it however you'd like. And we'll see how this Game 7 on Wednesday matches up with these, and whether or not the 3-2 comebacks have 9 or only 8 out of 17. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.